In this video, I'm going to go over how to symbolize English conditionals in terms of our logical notation. So in this class, we will symbolize a conditional of the form if P then Q as follows. P arrow Q. Now, just for your information, sometimes logicians use this little sideways horseshoe symbol instead of an arrow for this purpose. But in this class, we're going to go ahead and use the arrow, in part because it's easier to type. Now, suppose that we have the English sentence, if it is raining, then the streets are getting wet. And we want to take this sentence and write it in terms of our logical notation. The first step is to identify all of the self-contained sub-sentences to be found in this sentence. That is, all the sub-sentences that do not themselves have sub-sentences as parts. So I see two such sentences. The first is, it is raining, and the second is, the streets are getting wet. Alright, the second step is to replace all the self-contained sub-sentences in the original sentence with propositional variables. So let's let P stand in for it is raining, and let's let Q stand in for the streets are getting wet. When we plug these variables into the original sentence, we get the following: if P, then Q. Alright, now the third step is that once all the self-contained sub-sentences have been replaced with propositional variables, we'll replace the English sentential connectives with logical symbols. So this is an if-then sentential connective, and we've seen that that's symbolized with the arrow. So that gives us the following sentence, P arrow Q. Alright, let's look at a more complicated example. Consider the following sentence. If Jill comes to the party, then Jack will also come to the party unless he gets sick. Let's consider how we might go about translating this sentence into the logical symbolism that we've learned so far. The first thing to note about this sentence is that its structure is ambiguous. We could regard its structure as working like this. We could group, if Jill comes to the party, then Jack will also come to the party. We can group all that together into its own conditional, and we can essentially say that the sentence is saying that that conditional is true, that whole conditional in the parentheses is true, unless Jack gets sick. An alternative is to group things as follows. So here we have, if Jill comes to the party. Jill comes to the party is the antecedent of this conditional, and then of the main conditional, and then the part grouped in parentheses is the consequent of the main conditional. So what this sentence essentially says is that the part in parentheses is true on the condition that Jill comes to the party. Now, perhaps a case can be made for either of these readings, but I find the second of them to be the more natural one. So that's the one that I'm going to go with for the purposes of symbolizing this argument. And it does make a difference. You'll get different symbolizations depending on how you decide to parse the structure of this sentence. So part of your task here is to try to figure out what the sentence means. Consult the meaning of the sentence with your knowledge as an English speaker and figure out how the structure is actually working. That's a step you have to take before you symbolize the sentence. Now let's identify each of the self-contained sub-sentences that we find in this sentence. So I see Jill comes to the party, Jack will also come to the party, he gets sick, or if we replace the pronoun, Jack gets sick. Now let's replace each of these sub-sentences with a propositional variable. So that is, let P abbreviate Jill comes to the party, let Q abbreviate Jack will also come to the party, and let R abbreviate Jack gets sick. Okay, if we replace all those sub-sentences with those propositional variables, we get if P, then Q unless R. Okay, so now let's go ahead and symbolize the main if-then part of the sentence. So that gives us P arrow Q unless R. And now let's work on symbolizing the parenthetical part of this sentence. As we've already learned, Q unless R is equivalent to Q if not R, which is also equivalent to if not R, then Q. So we may symbolize the parenthetical part of the above sentence as follows: if not R, then Q. Okay, if we put that all together, we get this: P arrow parentheses not R arrow Q close parentheses. And that is our symbolization of that more complicated sentence. So I'm going to go ahead and assign you a worksheet that will allow you to practice symbolizing English conditionals, and then after that you can watch a video that debriefs you on that worksheet. This will help you get some practice in symbolizing conditionals in our logical notation.